The shooting at Annunciation Catholic Church in Minneapolis has obviously broken the nation's heart, as you just heard. Here with insight and analysis on this story and the ongoing battle over the liturgy and more, the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of the CatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, and canon, lawyer, and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I wanted to get your take on the spiritual nature of what happened this week in Minneapolis. This 23-year-old killer, who was a male, who identified as female, shot these innocent children through the windows of the parish church there in Minneapolis. Archbishop Bernard Hedba, the Archbishop, led priest in a rosary on Wednesday morning following the shooting. Meanwhile, the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, had this to say.
Don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying.
Father, your thoughts on Mayor Frey's comments following this tragedy?
Yeah, they were a little out of place, to say the least. We don't try to downplay the reaction people have is to think and pray after a horrific, diabolical incident like this. And that really is what needs to be highlighted here. This man, claiming to be a woman, was in fact doing something horrifically diabolical. He was directly opposing God and Christ and the church. He rejoiced in killing innocent people. He tried to prevent them from getting out of the building so he could kill more of them. This is diabolical. This is reminiscent of, the horrific horrors that the Nazis did in the Second World War. This is horrific.
Yeah. Bob, high on the list of concerns for Mayor Frey after these horrific events was this, quote, I've heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community. Anybody who's using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity. Kids died. This needs to be about them. Bob, no one wants certainly an atmosphere of hate in the wake of tragedy, but your reaction to these comments, it seemed to be an attempt to stifle discussion of the shooter's background and what might have been going on in his mind.
Yeah, he's a deeply, deeply troubled man. He changes to being a woman, and then, as we're reading in the news these days, he actually said recently he's tired of being trans. And he was working before this happened for several months in some marijuana dispensary. So if you read the actual things he wrote, which sometimes are, by the way, are written in Russian characters, it's a hodgepodge of all sorts of stuff. He's a very confused, and I think Father is rightly to say there's a kind of a diabolical element in this. But look, it starts with the question of, is it true or is it not true that people who think they are trans are disturbed? We've had 4 major school shootings in recent years, 2 by trans people, when trans is an infinitesimal part of our population. So look, we don't want to demonize anyone, but we do need to be realistic and truthful about the fact that a person who thinks that by simply declaring themselves to be a different gender are that gender. This is magical thinking. That kind of person is deeply disturbed, and it's not surprising that a relatively high number of people who are carrying out these things are trans. So look, he's trying to divert the problem away from looking at that truth and put it into a political lens, when in fact that is inescapably part of what this story is about.
Yeah. Given the troubled nature, Father, of this shooter, shouldn't the role of mental illness be a focus here? And certainly whatever medications he was on, in addition to the marijuana that Bob mentioned. I mean, he worked at this dispensary.
Yeah, Bob has hit on the target, and thank you for bringing up mental health. People who think they're a different sex than the one they are suffering a mental health problem. They are sadly misled in thinking that God made them the wrong sex. They say, I'm a man in a woman's body. This is ridiculous. We call this a disorientation or an alienation from yourself. And really the word alienation should come here into the whole discussion. People alienated from what they are then become alienated from other people and from the world around them, from the law of God. If you read what this man wrote, he's mocking God. He had target pictures set up with Jesus Christ in the head.
Yeah.
This man was completely disconnected, morally speaking, from the commandment that we have to love our neighbor. He's an evil, evil man doing evil things, and we shouldn't go around tiptoeing saying, well, since he was trans, he was a victim, and therefore he's somewhat justified in lashing out at society. This is nonsense. People who peddle that are doing a disservice. Mental health help should have been given to this man so he can get out of it. But instead, sad to say, his mother went to a court to have his name legally changed.
Yeah.
That is magical thinking.
Yeah, well, I mean, the New York Times today, I'm going to read the headline. Minneapolis suspect knew her target, Bob, but motive is a mystery. I mean, they're confirming the mental illness in some ways, the disassociation, the alienation that Father mentioned a moment ago. And doesn't this call to mind that Nashville shooter who killed those 7 innocent children who was also transitioning?
Yeah, I was about to say that exactly myself. I mean, this isn't simply a mass shooting. This is a mass shooting of children in a church. So if you want to just look at the truth of this situation, okay, we can say that he may have been mentally disturbed. He was under the influence of drugs. There may have been some demonic influence here. But the mere fact that this is in a church, children, this is taking the most innocent group in our society and deliberately targeting them. If you read his so-called manifestos, he's obsessed with mass murders. But to specifically choose, and we have those pictures, those hand-drawn pictures that he has of the church, he clearly laid out at that particular church. So we've got a religious element that he introduced, we didn't introduce it, and he's going after these young children because he apparently knew that school very well. So those two things added up. On top of the mental difficulties, we're in the presence of a specific type of evil. This isn't just a mass shooting, it's a mass shooting in a religious and young children's situation.
Yeah. Father, I want to dwell on this for a moment. In that manifesto, and there was a video manifesto that this Robert released, and he showed many disturbing things, including anti-Christian, anti-Semitic messaging. He had written messages on the cart, the gun magazines. Where is your God? All kinds of dialogues with Satan in his diaries, which are very disturbing. It does focus one on the reality of evil. And speak to that, because this is a baptized Catholic we're talking about, this guy. He went to that school. He's a graduate of the school. His mother was a secretary there. What does that tell us about the nature of evil? And speak to me about at times he seems to be warring with himself in this diary. I don't want to do this, but you have to do it. I don't want to go down this road, but kill, kill, kill.
No, he's play acting. He's trying to make an interesting script for the people are going to read it after he kills himself. The man's a coward. He kills children. He kills himself. He is doing some evil act and is taking it out, criticizing God, authorities, going after Jewish people in his writing. This man is a complete degenerate, morally speaking. And I want to ask, where were his parents and neighbors on this whole thing? I saw one account, neighbors who lived in the same apartment complex didn't see any mental health issues. They were mental health professionals they identified in the story. So, the fact that he is demonically influenced, set out to commit evil, this is the problem we have in our culture, where we relativize truth and morality and say people choose what's right for them, your truth, your morality. No, evil is determined by God, the natural law. People who violate it have to be taught, don't do that. And so for him to have all of this focus on murderers in the past, people like Adam Lanza up in Connecticut killed all those children, this man is very, very evil, trying to imitate evil people.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. Where were the parents? I mean, he legally acquired all of this, this arsenal that he brought with him to enact this slaying on these innocent people, shooting through the stained glass of that church. Look, there'll be much more to unpack in this story in the days ahead, and we'll stay on it. But I want to move on to some other stories. Parishioners in the Archdiocese of Detroit gathered outside the Cathedral of the Most Blessed Sacrament recently to protest prayerfully Archbishop Edward Weisenberger's suppression of the traditional Latin Mass. In the wake of the Diocese of Charlotte's crackdown, Bob, earlier this year, to that backlash that arose when the bishop there, wanted to shut it down in July, he granted an extension. Could you see something similar happening in Detroit?
Well, look, I don't think that we're going to get a resolution on this until the Pope himself speaks. We've talked about this before, that we're put in this difficult situation that Traditionis Custodes has essentially tried to eliminate the traditional Latin Mass by restricting it to such a degree that it almost has to naturally expire, given that it's so restricted. But clearly, there is a dynamic out there among the people, particularly here in the United States. And I think that that's quite interesting, because we've got an American Pope who can't help but be aware of what's going on right now. And now we've got two different places where the local people, without raising any sense of illegitimacy about the papacy, or all the things that we keep hearing about, they're just saying, look, we value this form of worship. This is the thing that we're willing to stand up and say, look, just please be fair toward us, because this is as Benedict said, what was sacred in the past cannot be not sacred in the future. That this was the way that many people prayed for centuries. We find this a nourishing way to be in church on a Sunday morning, and why not allow that group of people to worship in the way that is best for them? If a problem arises, if they begin to clash with their local bishop, well, then that's an obvious difficulty, and it needs to be examined. But I think just in general terms, there will be no resolution of this until our Pope himself decides to do something about it.
Yeah. Another story, Father, I want your reaction to this. The Archdiocese itself is putting on what they're calling a jazz mass on Sunday, August 31st. According to the Detroit Diocesan website, come be inspired by gospel and jazz music, which draws upon the people's hearts and spirits. The musical setting for the Holy Mass will honor the culture and history of jazz in Detroit. The event is an example of our Catholic faith bringing richness to all areas of our lives. Now, Father, the Archdiocese will honor the culture and history of jazz in Detroit. But what about the culture and history of the Church itself as exemplified in the traditional Latin Mass liturgy?
You raise a great point, Raymond. By the way, when all those churches were built in Detroit, the Latin Mass was being celebrated, the vast majority of them. So the cultural heritage is you build a building for a specific form of worship, and then you ban that form of worship, but you say, now we're going to introduce something different. Jazz masses really don't have a place in the church, because the focus then becomes on the music, not on what's happening. Jazz is not a traditional form for active worship. In fact, you're from New Orleans. Jazz is all about improvisation, and it's all about kind of free form. And I love jazz. Jazz piano is one of my favorite things to listen to, but not at Mass. Mass is about form, bringing people in contact with the invisible, and it's directed, though, by the scriptures and the prayers. So it's not about the musician's genius. It's about how do you bring forward the message in the Mass.
Yeah, and jazz is about rhythm and syncopation and, getting everybody moving in that same vibe. That's not what the Mass is about. Mass is about focus on God and the transcendent. And you're right, the improvisatory nature, it's actually conflicting with the nature of the Mass itself and what it should be. But it's always amazing to me. We make room, we create new categories of history and culture over here, and yet we ignore the actual history and culture of the Mass itself. Okay, I got to move on to this. Pope Leo has made significant adjustments to the makeup of the Dicastery for Clergy this week. He just appointed a number of new members of this Dicastery. Now, they oversee priests and clergy worldwide, including Cardinals Tagle, Roche, Grech, who's head of the synodal office, and others. There's also a number of consultors to the Dicastery, including 2 women religious. Bob, then Father, your thoughts on these new cardinal appointments as well as the women religious consultors to this Dicastery that deals primarily with priests and deacons and diocesan clergy?
Yeah, I have to say I was disappointed when I saw that list because to me, other than the appointment of the two women, which obviously is a further step in this direction of trying to be inclusive, which I think of as a political category rather than a spiritual and an ecclesial category, it's the same old figures. You know, Tagle, Grech, you know, all these people. I guess Bishop Varden from Scandinavia was appointed. He's a very powerful and prayerful type of person. So that was an interesting appointment. But it just seems to me that this doesn't really send out a message of any kind of new energies being brought to that particular dicastery. And we certainly need a lot of renewal. And I think a way of finding some kind of activity of the Spirit in all these offices in the Vatican, which I think have rather been languishing or been off on tangents from the primary mission of the Church, which I think Leo has identified quite rightly is to put Jesus in front of everyone, to energize them in their spiritual lives, and recognize that all the other things that we think that we're concerned with are important, but they're secondary to that one spiritual goal.
Father, your reaction, quickly.
Yes, I was happy because Bishop James Checchio of Metuchen, New Jersey, was listed on as a member, and he was the former rector of the North American College, so he's a very serious and good man. I was disappointed because I was looking at among the consultors, there are quite a few of them from the Gregorian University, which is run by the Jesuits, and that's fine, but I didn't see names from the Angelicum or the Santa Croce run by Opus Dei, so I'm thinking that the span of experts is favoring one university and leaving out others. I don't like that.
Yeah, no, again, I think everybody expected some big sea change. Maybe this is the Pope of continuity rather than the Pope of, and I mean that continuity with Pope Francis's reign rather than his predecessors. But we'll see. Look, I think with Pope Leo, what we're seeing is sort of a mixed bag. On the one hand, he is certainly more traditional in the way he appears, in his public pronouncements. We're hearing a return to the gospel. On the other hand, the personnel that's being chosen seem to favor the same characters we saw under the reign of Pope Francis. We'll see where this shakes out and who ends up leading these dicasteries, which will tell the tale. That will really tell the tale. Pope Leo's also wading into the Middle East, calling for Israel to stop what he calls the collective punishment and forced displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Bob, Pope Leo is pleading for an immediate ceasefire, a permanent one in the region. Now, this occurs in the backdrop of Netanyahu and Israel launching a new military offensive into Gaza. Is that a tall order right now, a ceasefire?
Well, look, it's good to call for peace. It's always good for people to try to seek a way out of a conflictive situation like this in which lots and lots of people are dying. I've said before, I'm basically a supporter of Israel. I think that Israel underwent a horrific attack on October 7 a few years ago. People have kind of done the math on this, and if we had a proportionate attack here in the United States, it would be like 50 or 60,000 Americans being killed or kidnapped on a single day. So it was a tremendous blow to Israel. But at a certain point, the attack on Hamas, I think, begins to become counterproductive, and we're probably at that point. I understand why Israel wants to eliminate Hamas. Is that what's happening right now at this point? And so maybe it's a good thing for Leo to put a little bit of pressure on them. I'm glad that he also mentioned that the hostages ought to be released, because I don't think it's even remotely possible to think about a ceasefire until that dimension of the problem is resolved.
Yeah, no, it's a quagmire. And look, but you also can't root out Hamas at the expense of every civilian, and distinguishing between civilians and those who are partial to Hamas, that's a hard thing to do. So look, I understand all sides here feel aggrieved, and you do have these fledgling Orthodox and Catholic communities there caught in the crossfire in Gaza, and our prayers are certainly with them in this moment. Before I go, Father, Pope Leo is also speaking out to Catholic politicians this week. He addressed a group of French political figures. Leo called on them to strengthen their knowledge of Catholic doctrine, to defend natural law, and oppose what he called party directives. Pope Leo offered the following advice. The first and the only advice that I shall give you is this: unite yourselves ever more closely to Jesus. Live from him and bear witness to him. Father, is natural law over ideology possible in today's politics?
Well, we can always appeal to what, people say we have to have social justice, for instance, and that becomes a unifying theme in political life. But what is social justice? It's the application of natural law and the role of human conscience to recognize that there's a difference between good and evil, and that we have an obligation to do good and to avoid evil. So, yes, I was very happy with that message. The Pope is right on target. Right now we face in the moral realm euthanasia, surrogate motherhood, the creation of gender, this gender ideology, all of these things, which at essence are an attack on man and the natural order. How are we going to combat that? Well, we have to make this broad appeal based on natural law and say citizens of each country have an obligation to conform their laws to what will truly benefit all the citizens, and not simply the interest groups who are promoting these deviant ideologies, as you mentioned, the ideologies which reduce man to simply a bunch of desires that he can satisfy as he sees fit.
Well, we will leave it there, gents. I thank you for the time. And for more commentary from Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray and myself, you can visit the Arroyo Grande channel. And we will continue to pray for all those victims of this terrible Minneapolis school shooting and church shooting, and keep those families in our prayers. Gentlemen, thank you.